Hello everyone, my name is Ryan Craig. Welcome to the FME and Esri webinar. Also joining me today is Robin Rennie, and she'll be answering questions as you type them in the questions panel. For this webinar, I'll be showing the training manual on half of the screen. You can also have your manual open on your own computer if you like. You can download the manual and the sample data used for this webinar by going to either this long URL, or http fme.ly/FEQ. That'll also take you to the download page. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available for viewing in the next couple of days. A little bit of GoToWebinar housekeeping. GoToWebinar is the application I'm using to present this course. I have everyone muted because you cannot have a large number of people unmuted in a webinar. You can change the zoom settings in the GoToWebinar viewer if the screen is too large or too small. You'll find an option for that in the top left corner of your GoToWebinar viewer. You can hide the GoToWebinar control panel by clicking on the red arrow button. You can use your telephone or your computer speakers to listen to the webinar. If you click on the telephone radio button, it will list the phone numbers you can use and how to connect to this meeting. And that could be a useful option if the voice over IP is slow or stuttery for you. You can ask me questions through the questions panel on your GoToWebinar panel. The questions panel is the best way to get our attention. I don't really pay attention to the raised hands. I really only use the raised hands to do quick on-the-fly polls. I do try to answer the questions as we go along, but if we're getting off topic or running short on time, or the question is just plain hard, I might skip over it and respond to the question via email after class. So what you see on the left-hand side here is the training manual. I'll be using FME Desktop 2012 SP4 and Esri ArcGIS 10.1 for this demonstration. These training materials will also work with FME Desktop 2012 SP1 and later, and Esri ArcGIS 10.0. FME supports a number of different geodatabase formats, which you'll find listed on page 6. For this webinar, we will only be using the Esri geodatabase, file geodatabase ArcObjects reader and writer. There are some small differences in the capabilities of the various readers and writers, and you can find details about those differences at http fme.ly/1967. We do support older versions of GeoDatabase, so long as Esri still does too. One thing I will mention, you'll notice that we have two file geodatabase readers and writers, the File Geodatabase API and the File Geodatabase ArcObjects. The File Geodatabase API uses their Open API. This means that you do not have to have Esri ArcGIS installed and licensed on the computer in which you're reading geodatabase or writing geodatabase data. The limitation of the API is that they did not put the full functionality of the File Geodatabase ArcObjects libraries into the File Geodatabase API. So let's get started by taking a look at example 1 on page 7. In this example, we're going to create a geodatabase using an ArcGIS XML workspace document. Before we do that, let's look at some of the functionality that the Esri Data Interoperability Extension and the FME Extension for ArcGIS bring to Esri ArcGIS. Now, if you have FME Desktop with an Esri or higher license, so that could be an Intergraph edition, an Oracle edition, a Small World edition, or a Microsoft SQL Server edition, you have the FME extension for ArcGIS available to you. To use it, You have to turn it on, however. So, if you have the appropriate edition of FME, you can open up the FME Integration Console. And you'll find the FME extension for ArcGIS. If you're using a fixed FME license on your computer, it will be automatically extended. If you're using a floating license, you'll have to extend it. The reason why you have to extend it if you're using a floating FME license is that you probably have a lot more ArcGIS licenses than FME licenses. And when you start ArcGIS after extending the data interoperability extension, or the not the data interoperability extension, but the FME extension for ArcGIS, once you start ArcGIS, it will check out an FME license. So in whichever ArcGIS component you want to use the extension in, you would go up to Customize, Extensions, and we have the FME extension for ArcGIS. Now, if you are using a floating license for FME, you can free up a license by unchecking this here. You do not have to go back to the integration console again. So I'll just turn this back on. There we go. Once it is extended, you will notice that there are some additional functionalities in our catalog. So in our exercise, pull this off to the side here, we can start up our catalog. If you do click on it here, for those of you who are following along or watching this video later on, you can pin it to your screen. We'll want to add a folder connection which contains the location of our data. So I'm going to connect to a folder. I'm going to connect to C FME data. Now with the extension turned on, the first thing you'll notice is that you can view data that you ordinarily wouldn't be able to see. Like, for example, bringing in an E00 file. Just maximize this again so we can see it all. Just give me a moment here. I lost my catalog. There we go. So I can bring over an E00 file. And I can also bring over something like a map info tab file. And it just drops that data in like any other layer. And you can query them as well and see all the attributes for those features as well. Now another thing which you'll notice in the catalog is the FME connections. Being able to drag and drop the data in works really well for file or folder-based data sets, but if you had a database, we could add a connection. So it reminds me I should delete the connection I was experimenting with yesterday. Also, if you wanted to read in data using non-standard, the non-default options for reading in data, you can set that here, and also you can tell FME to connect to a data set where ArcGIS does actually have the capability of reading it, and we'll see that in an upcoming example. So, continuing on with this example, we're going to want to take a look at the XML workspace document, and that's being kept in C FME Data Resources Esri. So under C, FME Data, Resources, Esri, we have our XML document. If I double click on that, this is what we have. So that's an XML formatted metadata that defines the geodatabase, all of its subtypes, domains, relationship classes, etc. Now we're going to use that to create the file-based geodatabase that we'll be using throughout the rest of the course. To do that, we'll use FME Workbench. Now you can start up FME Workbench by clicking on the Start button, All Programs, FME Desktop, and choosing FME Workbench. Now for mine, I've always attached that as an icon in the Quick Launch. So here's FME Workbench. In this particular example, the Workbench workspace already exists. It's the Load City Data Workbench workspace file. So I'm going to open a workspace and open up that particular Workbench workspace. So this is the workspace here. It's going to read in a series of E00 files and an address points file. But it also, on the writer, for a template file, is going to make use of that XML document. So now I can run the workspace. This will overwrite any existing city data file geodatabase which I have. Taking a little bit longer this morning. One thing I will mention while this is running, this is creating the city data GDB file. Now one thing you should note about file-based geodatabases is that if you are actually viewing this, ArcGIS does lock the file. It means that if you went to run another translation loading into that geodatabase, if I had this expanded, the translation would fail with an error saying it's unable to open the file-based geodatabase. Quick and easy way to get around that, just collapse that branch and click refresh, and that seems to unlock it, and then you'll be able to run the translation. So now that's created our file-based geodatabase. Now we can click and drag this into the, say for example, our city grid, into the view. You know, so we have different colors here for all the different subtypes that we had in our grid, and those are all defined in the XML document. So let's take a look at handling annotation with FME. As far as FME is concerned, annotation is any sort of text entity, including multi-part text, leader lines, and feature-linked annotation. When writing annotation, we do not work directly with the various fields that contain information about the annotation. Instead, we use parameters and format attributes in Workbench. FME then fills in the annotation fields as part of the reading and writing process. The full list of annotation-related format attributes can be found in the FME Readers and Writers Reference Manual. The FME Readers and Writers Reference Manual is available in FME Workbench under Help, FME Readers and Writers Reference. If you are going to be working with geodatabase data, I do recommend taking, at the very least, a quick skim through the geodatabase section. Under Feature Representation, we would find the Annotation. And this contains all the information that we'll be using in the upcoming examples. Now, the two most important format attributes are GeoDB text string and GeoDB text size, which specify, of course, the actual text value and the size of the text. When reading annotation features, FME will retrieve both the ArcCatalog values and the underlying database values. These contain the same information, but store them with different names and values. As I mentioned earlier, when writing annotation, we do not work directly with the various fields that contain information about the annotation. Instead, we use parameters and format attributes in Workbench. FME then fills in the annotation fields as part of the writing process. There are also parameters for dealing with multi-part annotation, such as whether or not to split multi-part annotations into separate features. Let's take a look at basic annotation writing in example 2 on page 11. So in this example, we will be starting with a partially defined workspace, which is loading the water distribution data. First of all, we're going to want to take a look at our distribution data. So in ArcMap, just going to clear out everything which I have here. Actually, I guess I could leave those in for now. So in FME data, under water, I have water distribution N26. Now this icon here, I noticed that with the FME data, it looks like this. This indicates that it's actually the DWG, well, the AutoCAD reading capabilities of ArcGIS itself, which is being used to read this data. If I drag and drop this in, it lists everything by geometry type. Now, within an AutoCAD file, you'll probably have actual named layers, and we can actually tell FME to read in this AutoCAD file instead, and then we'll be able to see those named layers. To do that, we're going to be using an FME interoperability connection. So at the very bottom, sorry, I went to scroll while looking at the wrong thing. So at the very bottom of the ArcCatalog, we have the FME connections. Scroll this over there, give us a bit more room. And I can add a connection. So I'll double click on this, and I can choose our AutoCAD reader. Just a show of hands here, how many of you would be reading in AutoCAD files? Just raise your hand. Okay, a fair number of you. Talking with our AutoCAD developer, we have two AutoCAD readers. We have the Autodesk AutoCAD DWG DXF reader and the Autodesk AutoCAD Real DWG DXF reader. They use different libraries for reading in the DWG file. This one here is an open library, and then the real DWG is the one coming from Autodesk themselves. Generally speaking, we recommend the real DWG reader-writer. Okay, the data set is C, FME data, water, and it's the water distribution N26. Always important to check parameters whenever you're reading in a data set. In this case, I want to group the entities by attribute schema. That's what I want to do for all of my AutoCAD files in this course. So at the bottom here, I can save that as my defaults. And if we so desired, we could set the coordinate system as well. I'm going to skip that. So now we have an FME connection to that AutoCAD file. And I can drag and drop that in as well. Get rid of my city grid. So now I can see my water distribution lines, nodes, and text, and my water meters. And you notice that it's actually giving me the names of my layers as opposed to just grouping it by geometry. Now within Catalog, under the System Toolboxes, when you extend FME, you also get the FME interoperability tools. And this is, of course, also in the Data Interoperability extension. The interoperability tools contain a quick export and a quick import. The quick export is intended to go from a file-based geodatabase out to any of the supported FME formats. In practice, it actually goes from any supported data set, and because you have the Data Interoperability extension, that now becomes anything supported by FME, out to anything else supported by FME. This is basically the equivalent of the FME Quick Translator. With the Quick Import, this allows us to take any format supported by FME and do a quick translation into a file-based geodatabase. So let's actually do this. We'll double-click on Quick Import. We can choose the input data set. It remembers our most recent settings, so it has the AutoCAD file already selected. We can double check the parameters. We have the attribute schema. A question here from Evan. How come we didn't select the group by layer name if you're looking for layer names? The group by layer name and the group by attribute schema do very similar things. Both will group by layer name. The difference is the attribute schema will also read in extended entity data. And extended entity data is a way for DWG files to store attribute information. They store attributes as part of, well, in the extra space of the geometry blob. So that's why we're grouping by attribute schema instead of layer name. They both actually go by layer name. I click OK. And now I choose the location of an output staging geodatabase. And I'm going to go to C, FME data, /output. Demo output test.gdb, and then I can hit OK. Now the bottom here, really quick. That was super quick. Let's see if I can actually still get to it in time. There's a little throbber that was running. Looks like it went too fast for me today. If you double click on that, it'll give you information about the translation. Basically, it gives you the translation log while you're running the translation. Basically, this information, if you can click on that little quick import throbber in the status bar, it'll give you this information here. So let's take a look at that. In catalog, output, demo output, I have my test geodatabase. I can drag and drop that in as well. Oh, there. Couldn't add it because it wasn't done yet. I'll have to refresh that. It's not liking it for some reason. But you can see that we have the various layers here. Oh, there we are. Just needed more time than I was giving it. And here we can see all of our water meters from that file-based geodatabase. Okay, so that's using a quick import to bring in data into a file-based geodatabase. You can also, of course, use Workbench itself. So let's take a look at this from an FME Workbench point of view. First of all, let's inspect the data in FME Workbench, or sorry, in the FME Universal Viewer. To start up the FME Universal Viewer, we go to Start, All Programs. We have FME Desktop and the FME Universal Viewer. Using the FME Universal Viewer is a good way to see everything that FME knows about the data. Again, you'll notice it's saving my defaults. Hit OK. And here's the data as FME sees it. Then you click on something, you'll get all of the attribute and geometry information that FME knows about that particular feature. So now let's add this data to our existing city data file-based geodatabase. So I'm going to go into FME, hit Start, and I'm going to start with Generate Workspace. So for the reader, I'm going to choose my real DWG file and my AutoCAD file. Again, always a good idea to double check the parameters. If you find that you've gotten to the point where you're adding a data set and you haven't actually examined it yet in the FME Universal Viewer or Data Inspector, there is this little button here which will take everything which you've filled in for this particular reader and send that directly to the Universal Viewer. So that allows you to quickly inspect your data. For the writer, we're going to go to the File Geodatabase ArcObjects writer. Now, if you specify a new File Geodatabase name here, then FME will actually create the new File Geodatabase. So you do not have to create the File Geodatabase in our catalog first. If you specify an existing File Geodatabase, then it will write out to that. So I have in CFME data, resources, Esri, and I have my citydata.gdb file. Always a good idea if you're choosing an existing file geodatabase to click on the parameters. In the parameters here, you have the option to overwrite the existing geodatabase. Basically, in that case, FME is creating a new geodatabase every time we run the translation. Keep in mind that would delete or destroy the existing file geodatabase. We don't want to do that. We have data in there currently, so we'll leave that as no. So I'll hit OK. Right now it's reading in the schema of the AutoCAD file. It'll present us with a list of all the layers available in that AutoCAD file. These are the 3 layers: water distribution lines, water distribution nodes, and water meters. The only one that we care about is water meters. So it will now only translate that layer. Now FME has created as best it can a matching definition for the water meters feature class. But there are some changes we'll have to make. So I'm going to go into the properties of my water meters feature type. Click on my format parameters, and for the featured data set, I'm going to choose water meters. Now for the reader, we're going to be looking at some annotation. When you're reading in data, a lot of the annotation information is stored as format attributes. You can see those listed here at the bottom of page 15. By default, the format attributes are not exposed. That's really just to reduce clutter. So we can go in and expose the format attributes that we want. So I'll just double click on my source feature type. Under Format Attributes, I can expose those particular text format attributes. So I want my AutoCAD text rotation, I want my text size, the text string, I also want my X position and my Y position. Now there are also equivalent format attributes on the writer. And I'm going to want to match those up. So I'll go back into the properties of my water meters destination feature type, click on Format Attributes, and some of the format attributes that I'll want to set. I'll want to be able to set the font, whether or not it is bold. I want to be able to set the font name as well. And then I also want my rotation. And I'll want some of my text format attributes as well, namely text size, text string, and the text X chord and text Y chord. So now that I've exposed all those format attributes, I want to match them up. So I've got my Y position, which I'll match up, my X position, my text string, my text size, and my rotation. Now it's a good idea to actually replace that mapping with a transformer, namely the attribute copier. I can just right-click on my feature connector and replace with attribute copier. And that'll hard code my attribute mapping. Now you'll notice that I still have not set my GeoDB font bold and GeoDB font name. I'll use an attribute creator to set those. So I'll drop in an attribute creator. And in its properties, I'll set GeoDB font bold to be yes, and GeoDB font name 3 times New Roman. Now, something which I mention in all of the training courses which I give is the importance of saving your workspace. As soon as you've actually put a bit of work into it, it's a good idea to save it. That way, if FME should crash, it doesn't happen very often, but occasionally Workbench does go down, or more likely, the power goes out. It's happened to me a couple of times. You do not lose the work that you've been doing. As soon as you save your workspace, this is my example 2, a recovery file is created. The next time you go to open up that workspace, if you did not close it cleanly, it'll ask if you want to recover any unsaved changes. Okay, so in the Universal View, in ArcMap, let's just make sure that we're not actually looking at that city geodatabase. So I'm just going to go out and refresh that. Otherwise, it could be locked, and then the translation would fail. I'll go back in here. Actually, let's just take a look there briefly. So this is going to write out to the water meters, and in its settings, we have water meters. Let me just make sure that wasn't supposed to change the feature type. Oh, I had that wrong. Okay, so in the feature dataset parameter, this should actually not be water meters, it should be water distribution. There we go. Feature dataset water distribution. So currently in here, here's our water distribution feature data set, and within that, you notice that there's nothing there just yet. We want to add the water meters to this water distribution. So I'm just going to close that down, refresh. That typically unlocks it. And now let's run the translation. So this will just take a moment. There we go. Now you will end up with this unexpected input if you have told FME not to read in all of the layers which are available in the source data set. When we initially created this workspace, we unchecked the water distribution lines and water distribution nodes. FME still feels it's important to tell you that you did not translate those particular layers. If you're working with CAD data a lot, you will be skipping over a lot of layers. You can always choose the do not show this dialog again, and then it'll stop bothering you. Back in Arc Catalog here, if I go back to my city data GDB, I have my water distribution, and now I have water meters. Let's take a look at that. And now if I zoom in, we have slightly nicer text than we did with just the straight translation. Now if we wanted to run this again, every time we would run this translation, it would add those features into that particular feature class. If we wanted to add in new features, or basically run them in again with different settings, we would want to set the either drop table first to yes or truncate table first to yes. FME can also write feature-linked annotation. Linking is done by defining a relationship through a common attribute. The relationship must already be defined in the geodatabase before writing the data. If the feature to be linked to by the annotation does not yet exist, it is possible for FME to write a feature as two features, one annotation feature and one non-annotation feature. And we'll see an example of this in a moment. A quick note about text size versus font size. GeoDB text size is in the ground units of your coordinate system. GeoDB font size is the font used to display the text string and is only used if GeoDB text size is not set. So let's write feature-linked annotation in example 3 on page 19. So the task here is to load property data into a feature data set. The output should be one feature for every property parcel plus a feature-linked annotation. Linking will be done via the parcel ID. Source data is property line work along with the centroid. We'll have to create polygons from the line work and then get the parcel ID from the centroid related to that particular polygon. In order to write feature-linked annotation, as I mentioned, the property data has to exist and the annotation linkage has to be defined. So let's check the geodatabase to make sure that's actually true. So in our catalog, we have our property data. You can see here that the parcels feature class already exists, and the feature link, or the annotation linkage, is already defined as such. So now we just have to populate those feature classes. Going back to Workbench, I'll click on Start and start with a blank canvas. Okay, so I'm going to add a reader to the canvas to read in my parcel data from a midmif file. The file I want is in C, FME data, properties, and I have a parcel N26 .mif file. Now, just another show of hands. How many of you read in files like mapinfo midmif files, mapinfo tab files, Esri shape files, or comma separated value files? How many of you actually work with that kind of data? Okay. One thing I'll mention is that when you're reading in those particular files, this file name will be set as the data set, but it will also be the name of the feature type on the canvas. If you wanted to read in a different data set, you could select the new data set, but it wouldn't match what's on the canvas and wouldn't be translated. Now, you do have an option of setting a feature type merge. If you're adding the reader using this method, however, you can simply check single merge feature type, and now I could read in any midmif file and it would work with this particular translation. So I hit OK, reads in that file. Instead of being defined as parcel N26, instead the merge feature type is turned on with a wildcard. And now if I did a prompt and run, I could choose any min-mif file, and this translation would work. Okay, so now that I'm reading in the particular min-mif file that I want, I'll want to store the actual file name. That's because the part of the file name indicates the grid that I actually want to be writing out to. So I'll turn on a feature type extractor. This just stores the name of the file in this case. Another option instead of the feature type extractor would be to use the format attribute FME base name. That would give you the exact same value. Next up, we want to filter the geometry. Our source data set contains lines and points. We want to deal with those separately. If you've started working on a particular translation, you realize, I've never inspected this data. A quick and easy way to do that, right-click on the reader, choose Inspect. So here's what our data looks like. As you can see, we have lines to create the parcels and the points for the attributes. And that's why we've added the geometry filter to tease those apart. Now we're going to want to write this out to our city data, our city data file geodatabase. So let's add the writer now. That's step number 4. We'll add the writer, objects, and resources, Esri, city data. Check the parameters. We do not want to overwrite the existing geodatabase. Static schema means that it will actually use the schema that we set for it. Dynamic schema means that it would try to obtain the schema from the source data set. We're reading in different data sets, it would try to apply a different schema. This works well if you're writing out to other file-based formats, but if you're trying to load into an existing database, dynamic schema is probably a bad idea. We want to add a new feature type. No, we're going to import the feature type definition from an existing table in the geodatabase, or an existing feature class. Let's go up to Writers, Import Feature Types. So the writer remembered what the most recent data set was, so I can just hit OK. It's now reading in that file-based geodatabase, or file geodatabase. Here's all of the tables available. The only one that I care about is parcels. So now it drops in the parcels feature type definition. Now I'll want to write to that in just a minute. Actually, let's take a look at the properties for this. Whenever you add a feature type, it's a good idea to examine the properties, make sure it has the correct feature type name, the correct allowed geometries. I will want to write out polygons. User attributes, you can remove anything you don't like. I'll also show that later on. The format attributes and the format parameters. Make sure that we're not dropping the table or truncating the table first. Okay, so now I want to take the lines and build some areas with an area builder. Whenever I'm dealing with CAD data and I go to make polygons, I'll also include the arcs and the areas as well, because all of those could be used to make parcels. Then take those areas and add a point on area overlayer. This will take all of the attributes from the areas and attach them to the points, but also all the attributes from the points, which have our attributes, and attach them to the areas. Well, one thing I forgot, in the area builder, I'm going to group by my feature type. That'll pass through that feature type value. To be honest, that would be coming through on the points anyways. So now I have all these attributes on my polygons. Now the full name for feature type is a bit longer than what we want. We just want the last 3 characters. To grab that on our areas, we will add a substring extractor. In our substring extractor, we're going to take our feature type, and we just want the last 3 characters going from the end backed up 3 to the very end, and we're going to save that as city grid ID. Now, if you had the name as a variable length, the attribute splitter or the string searcher might be a better choice for a transformer. But in this case, the substring extractor will work for our data. Now on the destination, we have a number of attributes that we don't actually need. When we import a feature type definition, it will bring in all the attributes from the database, but there are some attributes which are set by the database itself. And you can delete those because they'll be handled by the database. For example, object ID, that's handled by the database, as well as shape length and shape area. So we don't have to set those. So on the writer, we're going to change the transaction type. This is not going to be a transaction. This is going to be an edit session. Just make sure we're not viewing that particular database. I'll just refresh this. And now we can run the translation. So you'll note this does take a bit of time. So we'll just talk about the advanced task while that's running. If we tried to run this again, we would have trouble running it because all the features already exist in the table. We could try truncating with the settings in the parcels, but that would only truncate the polygon layer. It wouldn't truncate the annotation layer, so we'd end up with duplicate annotations. In order to truncate features from both layers, we'd have to use a Python script. An example of that Python script is here under the resources, and then you could point to that under Workspace Parameters Advanced, there's the Startup Python script. So you can select that Python script at the beginning of the translation. It would truncate the parcels and the annotation tables, and then you could rerun this workspace. Otherwise, this is kind of a one translation deal. Now, another thing with the Python to keep note of, the Python that was used by ArcGIS 10.0 is different than that being used by FME 2012. In the appendice, there is some help on that, setting that to use the ArcGIS Python. That stops being an issue with ArcGIS 10.1. Okay, so now we've written it out. Now if I go to my property data, I can bring in my parcels. Actually, I should have grabbed the whole thing there. Let's try that again. So in our catalog, I'll bring in my property data. That has my parcels and my text. And when I select one, it'll also show me what the other one is as well for my parcels. So those are linked together, the text and the actual parcel it belongs to. The question about regarding Python, 64-bit Python. Now, generally speaking, with 32-bit versus 64-bit, although you can install a 32-bit application on a 64-bit OS and everything is happy, within the applications, if one thing is 32-bit, then everything has to be 32-bit. And likewise with 64-bit, if one thing is 64-bit, everything has to be 64-bit. This is why the format support in the 64-bit FME is not as complete as the 32-bit FME, because 64-bit libraries aren't necessarily available for every format. So if you're using a 64-bit Python, you'd have to be using a 64-bit FME and have a 64-bit ArcGIS. Okay, so moving on to domains. Actually, it's 9:30. As opposed to making you sit through this for 4 hours straight, I think everyone would be happy if I gave them breaks. Just raise your hand if you don't think we need breaks. That's right, nobody raise your hand. So let's take a 10-minute break here. We'll start up again at 9:40.